man convicted of breaching the Capitol during the January the 6th riot and later pardoned by President Trump is back behind bars for allegedly plotting to assassinate House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
34-year-old Christopher Moynihan was arrested over the weekend and charged with making a terroristic threat after an anonymous tipster sent text messages they received from Moynihan to the police. Now, Moynihan allegedly wrote in those texts that he planned to target Jeffries at a speech he was scheduled to give in New York City, writing, quote, "I cannot allow this terrorist to live. Even if I am hated, he must be eliminated. I will kill him for the future." According to court filings, that tipster also cited concern for Moynihan's increased narcotic abuse and homicidal ideations. On Tuesday, he pleaded not guilty to those charges.
Jeffries responded to the alleged plot on his life in a statement, saying, quote, "Threats of violence will not stop us from showing up, standing up and speaking up for the American people." He added, "Since the blanket pardon that occurred earlier this year, many of the criminals released have committed additional crimes throughout the country. Unfortunately, our brave men and women in law enforcement are being forced to spend their time keeping our communities safe from these violent individuals who should never have been pardoned."
Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson also condemned the plot during a press conference Tuesday. Take a listen.
Terrible. That's the first I've heard of that. I don't know anything about it. But anybody who threatens to kill any political official, we denounce it absolutely. They ought to have justice fall upon their head. All right? How about that?
Capitol Police report this is just the latest in an increasing number of threats. Right now, they say they're on track to have around 14,000 threat assessment cases by the end of this year, compared to just 9,500 last year. Yeah, it seems pretty open and shut. It's a good test of the limits of the First Amendment, because your speech is broadly protected. You're right even to use speech that evokes violent imagery in a more abstract way. You can say that the government should be thrown and heads should roll and all that. But when you start to make a threat against a specific person and you start describing the time, manner, and place in which your attack would occur, that he's going to be in a specific place, and that's where you would go, and then using very direct language, kill this person, assassinate this person, then your speech moves from distasteful, albeit protected First Amendment activity, into a credible threat, imminent, a call to imminent lawless violence, or a confession that you're about to participate in imminent lawless violence. So that is not protected speech, and it was right to arrest him and correct to prosecute him, and I hope that he is convicted, as should anyone who makes a credible threat against our politicians or against anyone. It's not. That doesn't mean you can still use nasty language and harsh language, but that's the line there, and it's a pretty well-defined line in terms of Supreme Court jurisprudence. So I'm all for it, and I don't think any person on the right is saying, "Get this guy off." I haven't heard any yet.
No,
I hope no one does.
Right. I agree with the distinction you're drawing between free speech rights and acts, or the expression of imminent acts of violence. I mean, obviously that's an important distinction. But it's not that I think liberals are saying, "Oh, the right is trying to get this guy off." It's a more fundamental problem with the claims that Trump makes around law and order. And we were talking about this yesterday in relation to the Edward Korstein case. Trump portrays himself as the president who will protect law and order. Over the weekend just past, there was the No Kings demonstration all across the country, and Trump and people like Mike Johnson were talking in, to my mind, false but certainly very vivid terms about how this was a threat, it was subversive, it was all these bad things. That whole case is massively undercut by Trump's decision immediately upon taking office again to pardon around 1,500 people who were convicted of January the 6th related offences, including some who were convicted of serious violence against law enforcement officers. That automatically makes a mockery of this claim that he is the law and order president, because what it indicates is if you break the law in support of him, you can expect some level of leniency. Now, this guy Moynihan was convicted and sentenced to 21 months in February 2023. So he would have been out in any event. But the point, I think, is the message that is transmitted by those January the 6th pardons of leniency and tolerance and tacit approval, in fact, of acts of violence committed by Trump supporters against his enemies or in support of his aims.
I mean, I didn't support pardons for anyone who engaged in violence against police officers on that day or anyone else. I think some of the punishment, I mean, for instance, remember the MAGA shaman, that fellow. You know, I remember reading about it, and he had been in 3 years in prison, much of that in solitary confinement. I'm not trying to sort of undersell the crimes he did commit that were bad. I think defacement of public property, trespassing are things that should be charged, and it was right to charge him. But I don't know, he'd been in solitary confinement for like 3 years. It seemed kind of awful compared to what he did. So I wanted, and then you and I have argued about this, but I guess we'll have to do it again. The conviction, for instance, of people who were not even there when it happened, but were posited to have been intellectual leaders of a movement that eventually culminated in lawful action, in a almost akin to a domestic terrorism. The Proud Boys leaders who got like 20 years.
Enrique Tarrio.
Right, which seemed crazy to me because they weren't even there to engage in the actual lawless violence. And I would defend if there was some lefty leader speaking in favor of Black Lives Matter protesting that then turned violent or destructive, and they tried to say you're an Antifa domestic terrorist, which I'm sure the administration is gearing up to do. But I'm against that sort of thing.
Well, look, what I'd say here is
But repeat offenders, lock them up. They should absolutely go to jail for this.
Well, what I'd say is you and I have debated January the 6th lots of times. We have fundamentally different views of it. Yeah. Some of the people who you're referring to were convicted of seditious conspiracy, which is an extremely serious crime. But what I would also say is the argument that you're making there is about distinguishing. Some people are convicted, like the shaman guy, for example, right, from certain others who committed perhaps more direct acts of violence or whatever.
Right.
Whether I agree with that or not, the point is that you at least are seeking to make a distinction between severities of crimes committed on that day. Trump himself notably did not make any such distinction. He just issued this blanket measure of pardons and some commutations, regardless, apparently, of the seriousness of the crime involved, simply saying that if you were involved in that, what I consider appalling day in support of him, you got off, basically. That's the problem. And that's the problem when he then tries to make law and order arguments.
Right. I don't agree with doing that, and I think it was hard to defend. Kash Patel didn't agree with doing that either. He was asked in his confirmation hearing whether he would have pardoned or commuted the sentences of everyone involved in January the 6th, and he said no. He said just the ones who had already served time for non-violent offenses. And they had served time, like, your guy, this guy would have been out already. Again, so I think some form of punishment is, as I said this yesterday, we were talking, certainty of punishment and receiving some form of punishment are more important than duration of punishment, right, in a lot of these cases. But yeah.
But do you not take the point, though, that the Trump pardons in their blanket nature sent the message that there would be leniency shown in the future for his supporters if they engaged in illegality?
Yeah, maybe. They should not show any future leniency on behalf of any of these people who commit crime. And this speaks to, this person sounds, based on the little reporting we know, mentally unwell or drug involved or that kind of thing. And, it's important to remember that it's not always, even people engaged in acts or threatening acts that sound political in nature is often just the flavor that a mental illness can as the people yelling in the streets about Jews or blacks or women or whatever don't have these well worked out they're mentally ill, and mentally ill people lash out in exactly those kinds of ways.
And this man will have his day in court,
and deserves it. But if any of those pardoned people engages in further crimes, they should have the books thrown at them, and they should and it should be worse because they're repeat offenders. It should be much more serious. Repeat offenders is when you start to get into, there are, especially for people I think who have thrice been convicted of a crime, that's your violent crime problem entirely, is it almost in that category. So when you start, that speaks to three strikes laws, but lock them up.
Fair enough. At least we agree on that point.
Next up, Hunter Biden recently recalled a moment from last year when he felt extreme anger toward former President Barack Obama. We'll look at what he said up next.